Chapter 13 of Anne Veronica. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. Anne Veronica by H. G. Wells. Chapter the 13th. The Sapphire Ring. Part 1. For a time that ring set with sapphires seemed to be, after all, the satisfactory solution of Ann Veronica's difficulties. It was like pouring a strong acid over dulled metal. A tarnish of constraint that had recently spread over her intercourse with Capes vanished again. They embarked upon an open and declared friendship. They even talked about friendship. They went to the Zoological Gardens together one Saturday to see for themselves a point of morphological interest about the toucan's bill, that friendly and entertaining bird, and they spent the rest of the afternoon walking about and elaborating in general terms this theme in the superiority of intellectual fellowship to all merely passionate relationships. Upon this topic Capes was heavy and conscientious, but that seemed to her to be just exactly what he ought to be. He was also, had she known it, more than a little insincere. "We are only in the dawn of the age of friendship," he said, "when interest, I suppose, will take the place of passions. Either you have had to love people or hate them, which is a sort of love, too, in its way, to get anything out of them. Now, more and more, we're going to be interested in them, to be curious about them, and quite mildly experimental with them." He seemed to be elaborating ideas as he talked. They watched the chimpanzees in the new apes' house and admired the gentle humanity of their eyes, so much more human than human beings, and they watched the agile gibbon in the next apartment doing wonderful leaps and aerial somersaults. "I wonder which of us enjoys that the most," said Capes. "Does he, or do we?" "He seems to get a zest." "He does it and forgets it. We remember it. These joyful bounds just lace into the stuff of my memories and stay there forever. Living's just material." "It's very good to be alive." "It's better to know life than be life." "One may do both," said Ann Veronica. She was in a very uncritical state that afternoon. When he said, "Let's go and see the wart-hog," she thought no one ever had had so quick a flow of good ideas as he, and when he explained that sugar and not buns was the talisman of popularity among the animals, she marvelled at his practical omniscience. Finally, at the exit into Regent's Park, they ran against Miss Klegg. It was the expression of Miss Clegg's face that put the idea into Ann Veronica's head of showing Manning at the college one day, an idea which she didn't for some reason or other carry out for a fortnight. Part 2. When at last she did so, the sapphire ring took on a new quality in the imagination of Capes. It ceased to be the symbol of liberty and a remote and quite abstracted person, and became suddenly and very disagreeably the token of a large and portentous body, visible and tangible. Manning appeared just at the end of the afternoon's work, and the biologist was going through some perplexities the Scotchman had created by a metaphysical treatment of the skulls of hyrax and a young African elephant. He was clearing up these difficulties by tracing a partially obliterated suture the Scotchman had overlooked, when the door from the passage opened, and Manning came into his universe. Seen down the length of the laboratory, Manning looked a very handsome and shapely gentleman indeed, and, at the sight of his eager advance to his fiancée, Miss Klegg replaced one long-cherished romance about Ann Veronica by one more normal and simple. He carried a cane and a silk hat with a mourning band in one grey-gloved hand. His frock coat and trousers were admirable. His handsome face, his black moustache, his prominent brow conveyed an eager solicitude. "I want," he said, with a white hand outstretched, "to take you out to tea." "I've been clearing up," said Ann Veronica brightly. "All your dreadful scientific things," he said, with a smile that Miss Klegg thought extraordinarily kindly. "All my dreadful scientific things," said Ann Veronica. He stood back, smiling with an air of proprietorship, and looking about him at the business-like equipment of the room. The low ceiling made him seem abnormally tall. Ann Veronica wiped a scalpel, put a card over a watch-glass containing thin shreds of embryonic guinea pig swimming in mauve stain, and dismantled her microscope. "I wish I understood more of biology," said Manning. "I'm ready," said Ann Veronica, closing her microscope box with a click, and looking for one brief instant up the laboratory. "We have no airs and graces here, and my hat hangs from a peg in the passage." She led the way to the door, and Manning passed behind her and round her and opened the door for her. When Capes glanced up at them for a moment, Manning seemed to be holding his arms all about her, and there was nothing but quiet acquiescence in her bearing. After Capes had finished the Scotchman's troubles, he went back into the preparation room. He sat down on the sill of the open window, folded his arms, and stared straight before him for a long time over the wilderness of tiles and chimney-pots into a sky that was blue and empty. He was not addicted to monologue, and the only audible comment he permitted himself at first upon a universe that was evidently anything but satisfactory to him that afternoon was one compact and entirely unassigned "Damn!" The word must have had some gratifying quality, because he repeated it. Then he stood up and repeated it again. "The fool I have been!" he cried, and now speech was coming to him. He tried this sentence with expletives. "Ass!" he went on, still warming. "Muck-headed moral ass! I ought to have done anything. I ought to have done anything. What's a man for? Friendship!" He doubled up his fist and seemed to contemplate thrusting it through the window. He turned his back on that temptation. Then suddenly he seized a new preparation bottle that stood upon his table and contained the better part of a week's work, a displayed dissection of a snail, beautifully done, and hurled it across the room to smash resoundingly upon the cemented floor under the bookcase. Then, without either haste or pause, he swept his arm along a shelf of reagents and sent them to mingle with the debris on the floor. They fell in a diapason of smashes. He said, regarding the wreckage with a calmer visage. "Silly," he remarked after a pause. "One hardly knows. All the time." He put his hands in his pockets, his mouth puckered to a whistle, and he went to the door of the outer preparation room and stood there, looking, save for the faintest intensification of his natural ruddiness, the embodiment of blonde serenity. "Gellett," he called, "just come and clear up a mess, will you? I've smashed some things." Part 3. There was one serious flaw in Ann Veronica's arrangements for self-rehabilitation, and that was Ramage. He hung over her, he and his loan to her and his connection with her and that terrible evening, a vague, disconcerting possibility of annoyance and exposure. She could not see any relief from this anxiety except repayment, and repayment seemed impossible. The raising of £25 was a task altogether beyond her powers. Her birthday was 4 months away, and that, at its extremest point, might give her another £5. The thing rankled in her mind night and day. She would wake in the night to repeat her bitter cry, "Oh, why did I burn those notes?" It added greatly to the annoyance of the situation that she had twice seen Ramage in the Avenue since her return to the shelter of her father's roof. He had saluted her with elaborate civility, his eyes distended with indecipherable meanings. She felt she was bound in honor to tell the whole affair to Manning sooner or later. Indeed, it seemed inevitable that she must clear it up with his assistance, or not at all. And when Manning was not about, the thing seemed simple enough. She would compose extremely lucid and honorable explanations. But when it came to broaching them, it proved to be much more difficult than she had supposed. They went down the great staircase of the building, and, while she sought in her mind for a beginning, he broke into appreciation of her simple dress and self-congratulations upon their engagement. "It makes me feel," he said, "that nothing is impossible. To have you here beside me. I said that day at Surbiton, 'There's many good things in life,